On Friday's show, we interviewed NBC chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel about what was ahead for the ongoing revolution/protest movement in the world's largest Arab country. We noted that Egyptian protesters had plans to march on Sunday, yesterday, and again on Tuesday, and again this coming Friday. Richard responded by saying, yeah, it may be true that individual marches were planned for those individual days, but he told us we shouldn't expect people to be reconvening at Tahrir Square in Cairo for those marches, because he said nobody is leaving Tahrir Square. And he's right. This is footage just from tonight. Watch this. Not bad. Posted on YouTube earlier today by a reporter at Al Jazeera English. The carnival feel that so many people remarked upon last week, apparently it is still there. And then there's this, an impromptu salon called Revolution's Barber. Why would you need your haircut at a protest? Because you haven't gone home from the protest for more than a week now. People are not leaving. Tahrir Square is not just an ad hoc concert hall where you can get a trim. It's also turning into a tent city. One of the most circulated images from Tahrir Square last week was when Muslims wanted to hold a religious service on Friday. Egyptian Christians, Copts, surrounded them and essentially provided security for them while they prayed. Yesterday, the favor was returned. Egyptian Christians held a mass in the square. While they did so, they were protected by Muslims there. A nice rejoinder to people who say, be afraid of these protesters because they're so terribly, terribly intolerant. Joining us now for the interview is Mona El-Ghobashy. She is assistant professor of political science at Barnard College. She has been paying attention to Egyptian politics for a heck of a lot longer than the rest of us. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What is your view of the sustainability of the two sides here? Is Mubarak just trying to wait the protesters out, and are the protesters capable of that?
That's exactly what he's trying to do. He's now regained his footing after being completely caught off guard by the protesters in the first week of the protests, and his counterattack on Wednesday, when he had the armed gangs and the members of the ruling party storm the protesters and on camelback and horseback. But now the effort is to step back a little bit, offer some concessions to the opposition, attempt to divide the protesters, and basically wait them out. You know, it's very difficult to be standing up against one of the most strongest authoritarian regimes in the world. They've been doing this now for 15 days. It's very much an unequal power balance, and we're waiting to see what their stamina is going to be.
In terms of the stamina of the opposition, there's reports today that some people who are not pro-Mubarak, who are anti-Mubarak, are essentially in favor of accepting the concessions, saying, let's let life go back to normal, we've accomplished a great deal. Others are saying this does not end until Mubarak steps down. Do you have any insight into that split and whether it's likely to get deeper?
This is the key split that's occurring right now. Most of the public, even if they were originally sympathetic to the protesters, are dealing with fatigue, compassion fatigue. They want ordinary life to go on. They're starting to get concerned about the prospects of these protesters actually being able to survive this long. And so that's what he's banking on, the sense of the futility of all this, the attempt to say that this is radical. He has already said that he's going to step down in September, so why not accept this? So it's a rather shrewd move to basically let the movement itself dissipate under its own internal pressures.
Well, the protesters themselves have cited what happened in Tunisia as their inspiration for rising up in the way they did specifically on January 25th. Is there anything out there that's likely to be a continued catalyst, to give them continued momentum to keep mobilizing people under, as you know, difficult circumstances?
Well, like you already mentioned, they're already starting to think about the scheduling and the structuring of this. So instead of saying that every day we're going to have 1 million or 250,000 man protest, we're going to do specific days, Tuesday, tomorrow, Friday, which is the big day because it's a weekend and people have a lot better chance of actually coming down into the square. So they're trying to preserve their energies. They're trying to make sure that the energy that they've gotten up doesn't dissipate. And most importantly, they're trying to fight against those kinds of internal sort of informants going into the crowds, spreading the sense of futility, spreading the sense of fatigue. This is what we have to be looking for. And again, I just want to emphasize to your listeners that how difficult it is for these protesters, unarmed, unorganized, they are not led by any single party, how extraordinary it is that they've been able to maintain this in the face of very, very high odds.
If the Mubarak government, the police or internal security services or even the military starts to attack unarmed protesters again the way they did last week, will that help the protesters by catalyzing more of them, or will that scare people enough to keep them off the streets?
I think it'll help them. It'll have a more mobilizing effect. But I think what's more insidious right now is that the regime is perhaps not considering options of force. What it's considering are these carrots and sticks. So again, holding out certain carrots to the opposition so that the opposition parties can come and sit around the table, spreading the sense of fatigue, telling them that, well, what is your end game? What are you waiting for? We've already offered you these concessions, so why not just call it a day, and we've heard your demands, and we will make sure to answer your demands. I think the lack of force option, the option of spreading discouragement, is what's most important right now.
Let me ask you about one last thing. Even the most ill-informed observers, even noobs like me, could tell fairly early on that the military is important here. But it is difficult to tell what role the military is playing day to day. Is the fact that the Army now, not just the police, but the Army is detaining journalists, should we take that as a sign that the Army is siding more with the government than they have been in the past?
That is the sign to be taken. And the turning point was, if you recall, first when the military came in, they were widely welcomed by the protesters. There was a lot of fraternizing. The actual troops were very friendly to the protesters. The turning point came on Wednesday when Mubarak sent the police, the plainclothes police, and the armed gangs. However, the military stood by and didn't do anything, despite the protesters pleading with the military to please step in and protect them. Right. That was a sign when observers, all of us, plus protesters on the ground, realized that the military is not exactly neutral here. The military is standing very much behind Mubarak, and that has only increased by the day. And so now there is no doubt among people's minds that this is not going to be a Tunisia scenario, where the military withdraws its support from the president and the president flees. We're talking about a completely different context in which the military is very firmly behind Mubarak and has made that very clear.
And that means it means digging in for a much longer haul if this is going to be successful. Professor Mona El-Ghobashy, assistant professor of political science at Barnard College, and somebody who honestly I have wanted to talk to since we very first started covering this story. And I'm really glad we were able to get you to come out.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks
I really appreciate it.
Me
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks.